And welcome. I'm just going to keep that poll on a little bit longer for those coming in. And I can tell you now we've got a little bit of a balance between 30% have received an EIDL loan of those who are currently on at the moment. And 46% of you have received an MEO microgrant, but we will be giving more information about those as we continue on. So as I said, welcome and aloha to this seminar. A little bit of housekeeping. My name is Annette Lynch. I'm with Maui Economic Development Board Program Manager, and just going to get things started here with a little bit of housekeeping. Make sure we've got things going. So you're going to have opportunities to ask questions here, particularly, and those will be answered at the end. Please use the Q&A tab on the platform rather than the chat, and there's opportunities to upvote. So if somebody's already asked the question that you're interested in, then vote it up, and we'll be taking priority with those questions as we go along. We will attempt to answer as many questions as we can in this hour together. We have the poll, so thank you for participating there. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available as a replay. So hopefully you'll still be able to stay the whole hour and get your questions answered. And a slide deck as well will be shared after the webinar. So very valuable resource. Our agenda today, the welcome and introductions will happen, and then we've got update on the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, as well as information on the MEO Maui Agricultural Microgrant Program, and then time for Q&A. So with that, I am going to pass the mic to Leslie Wilkins, President and CEO of Maui Economic Development Board. Thank you, Leslie.
Aloha, and thank you so much, Annette, for always driving our webinars. This is actually MEDB's 9th webinar in business assistance. 7 of them have been part of our COVID-19 technical assistance for our businesses, and 2 others have been for our Women in Business series. We're pleased. We think this medium works for very busy business owners because we've had more than 7,500 views to the content of those 9. We want to thank the County of Maui for helping to sponsor MEDB's business assistance. They're a great partner. We also want to say happy Global Entrepreneurship Week to all of you. This week is noted a way to recognize the innovations and entrepreneurs that drive our economy. One of MEDB's founding missions is to help diversify and strengthen our economy, and we know it is growing our own homegrown businesses and strengthening existing businesses that will truly get us to a stronger and more diversified economy. One thing that the pandemic has taught us is that to be successful and competitive, we need to help our businesses retool and restructure to reach global markets and to join the global economy. So on that note, we have some demographics as to who's joining us today. So I'll let you review that. Thank you, Annette, for pulling that up. I'm going to need to close out the poll so I can see that. So as you can see, we have a great cross section of businesses joining us today. It's nice to see that we have a strong contingency from the ag, forestry, and fishing and hunting sector, given the fact that Dave Daley will be going over the microloans available to our ag businesses. Also, we have general public services, administration, and professional development. So again, it's a great cross sector of our economy. Go ahead, Annette, next slide. And then what's really striking with today's audience is that many of you are using the LLC corporate model for your business structure. And then we have a large contingency of mature businesses, 61% of you. So obviously keeping you strong, bringing you tools and access to capital is important in what this webinar will focus on. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce your MC for today's panel presentation. Gary Albus is a business consultant to Maui Economic Development Board. We're delighted that he's a member of our team. He has a strong background in business development and coaching. And so he has helped many of you in one-on-one settings and will continue to do that, as well as developing the content for our webinars. So thank you, Gary. I'm turning the mic over to you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Annette. Welcome to the 9th Business Assist Seminar. Thank you for registering and attending today. MEDB is constantly monitoring financial landscape for opportunities for you. So let us know if you're interested in future announcements or one-on-one business consulting or coaching from MEDB. Today, we have 2 speakers on the newly available programs. We'll start with Wayne Wong. Wayne is the Director of Small Business Development Center here in Maui. He brings over 30 years of experience in community outreach and employer engagement experience, small business commerce and technology, and he's an Emmy Award-winning music producer. Wayne, take it away.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm going to talk about the SBA products that are still out there, the economic relief products. I'm from the SBDC, and we are a technical partner for the SBA, so we're pretty familiar with what's going on. I think people have heard, the 2 loan programs, which would be PPP and the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. However, PPP has now been ended in terms of further applications, but forgiveness is still available for people that successfully got a loan and want to be able to have it forgiven, which would turn it into a grant, essentially. The deadline for that is 10 months after the end of your covered period. So whenever you spent the money, you had that 8-week or sometimes 16 weeks of a period where you could spend the money. And then from the end of that period, you have 10 months to apply for forgiveness. So even though they're not taking new PPP applications, there is still time for many of you to apply for your forgiveness. So what that leaves is really the economic disaster loan product. And then there is a somewhat confusing but similarly named targeted EIDL advance, which is a grant up to $10,000. And we'll talk about how you can apply for that or reapply even if you've gotten it. There may be some options in terms of you being able to get these products again, or there's on the advance program, there's a supplementary targeted advance. Next slide. So as I say, PPP is no longer being offered, but forgiveness is still on the table. And then if you click next slide again, the EIDL products will be ending, and this was just announced December 31st. And so these will be the last of the relief programs for right now, and they are ending December 31st. It depends on where you read it, but in one place, the SBA essentially says that you can apply up until December 31st. In another place, they mentioned that December 31st will be also the end of disbursement. So if you apply and you haven't been approved by December 31st, then you will not be able to get the money. And that is sounding more and more like what's going to happen, because with the recent passage of the celebrated infrastructure bill that Biden has been successful in getting passed, part of that negotiation was that as of December 31st, any monies that had not been distributed for EIDL actually is going to get sucked into the infrastructure bill. So it's sounding more and more like if you don't get an approval and disbursement by December 31st, then you're probably not going to be able to get any of these EIDL products. It does take 4 to 5 weeks in order to get the approvals. They are saying that they're speeding that up as much as possible. But basically what that means for you is you need to apply as soon as possible, like this week or next week. Next slide. So let's dig into the disaster loan. So on the disaster loan, I think people will fall into two categories, either, or three categories. One is you may not qualify at all. And essentially, startups are not going to be eligible for the loan, right? So you have to have been in business at least at some point in 2020. And if you started up in 2021, you are not going to be eligible. But for those of you that started earlier than 2021, you would break into two categories. So those of you that never have gotten an application in, here's the URL. It's the middle button. And basically you just go through the whole application process. It's all done online. And then there's a couple of forms that they may have you submit, but that's all done online as well. If you already got an EIDL loan, you actually are eligible, because what happened was in April and then again in September, they actually increased the amount that they were willing to give out. So, so people are able to, in a sense, apply for a second draw, and in some cases, even a third draw. And what you need to do is just log into your EIDL portal. So if you successfully got a loan before, all the management was done through a specific portal for you, and you would just log back into that. If you don't remember the URL, it's listed up there, but you do have to remember which user ID and password was. Okay, so next slide. And then just as a reminder, there is a grant portion, which is separate than the loan portion, right? And the grant side is called the advance. And so the initial EIDL advance went through and actually sort of got, the money got used up very quickly. So they stopped for a while and then they came back. But what happened when they came back was they had new requirements to get the advance. And the new requirements are called the targeted EIDL advances. And the major thing about the targeting is that there was a new requirement put in that your business had to be located in a low-income community as defined by this internal revenue code, which was displayed as a map. And so a lot of people are feeling like, well, I'm in a low-income community, but when you look on the map, it may not jive with what you think. And so the fact that it says you need to be in a low-income community, it is a community as defined by this map. And so before you go through any of the applications or anything like that, make sure that you go and look at this map and see and make sure that you are indeed in that locale. And then the second and third requirements is that you need to be demonstrate a 30% reduction in revenue and then 300 or fewer employees. If you're successful in getting that second advance, there is a third advance that you can apply for. And again, you have to be in that low income community. You have to show, instead of 30, now 50% reduction in revenue. And then you have to have, it's really meant for the smallest companies, which would be 10 employees or more. Next slide. So to apply for that, there's if you look at what the SBA website says, you will actually be invited. And so what that means is that you had some prior communications with the SBA and they sent you an invitation and it had a specialized link that allowed you to apply. If you have never gotten a loan before, then what you can do is actually apply for a loan. And in that loan process, it'll ask you if you qualify for the grant, and you can say yes. And then when your loan application is approved, you actually can decide to take a loan and the grant, or you can actually turn the loan down and take the and use the grant. For people that can't do any of those. We have had a little bit of success in having people just email this email address called targetedadvance@sba.gov. You know, it's a little bit weird because when we ask, well, how do we know whether everybody got an invitation that was qualified? We never did get a straight answer. And so many people did get the invitation, even when they weren't in a low income community. And so when they applied, they obviously got turned down. So it looked like they did over invite. But again, it's a little bit unclear in terms of how you get this if you did not get an invite. Next slide. So that's sort of the end of where we are for SBA economic relief at this point. The other products, you know, that you might have heard of, like the shuttered venue grants and then the restaurant revitalization grants, those are long gone. And then just as a final note, there is nothing in the pipeline in terms of Congress looking for more of these kinds of relief, right? And so once these are gone, which is the end of the year, then really the only other options that will remain will be what used to be there before, which are standard SBA loans, right? This the working loan, which is 7A, or the big asset loans, which is a 504. And then the other thing that is somewhat related to this is that the employee credit, retention credit is still available, and that should be available through also the end of the year. So that's it for what the SBA has to offer.
Thank you, Wayne. That was incredible. Good to learn. Our second speaker is going to be David Daley. And just as a reminder before I introduce David, if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A area and we'll review those at the end of the seminar. And now to introduce David Daley. He's the director of MEO's Business Development Center. He has over 25 years of experience with small businesses here on Maui, with small business ownership and management, business financing, business education, and entrepreneurial training. He's focused on small business startups. David, take it away, please.
Thanks, Gary. So I would like to just give you a little info on what we call the Micro Ag Grant Program 2.0. So last year, I would say a year ago, we had our first round of micro ag grants targeted for small farms on Maui. And the grant program essentially was targeted for smaller farms, meaning under 12 acres. And the grants were anywhere from 0 to 25,000. You couldn't go above 25,000. And the main focus from the county for this particular micro grant was to help underserved farms that are not eligible or unable to acquire any grant funding from larger institutions like the USDA or the FDA. So last year we did 2.5 million, and we awarded 105 grants with that program. This program number 2 this year is essentially the same. It goes up to 25,000. The criteria of eligibility is still the same, and the main focus for the micro ag grant still is locally grown produce. So it's a food producing farms. We're not able to assist flower farms, anyone who's not producing a food or added value food product. So we can go on machinery, packaging, technology, equipment, marketing supplies, equipment, websites. That also would include, marketing services. So if someone wanted to get the services of a company to help them market their farm, that would be included in there. There's also, as part of the, I guess, infrastructure, well, not really infrastructure, probably supplies, would be that there's manpower. So some farms actually were able to acquire labor and get that paid through this grant to help them with planting or harvesting or clearing. There was a lot of clearing of land, a lot of fencing, that sort of thing. So all of these are eligible uses for this grant. And we'll go on to our next slide. So here's the requirements, and that there's a very, very simple, and this was specifically made this way by the County of Maui, as they wanted to make it very inclusive. When you hear of a grant, people think of, a fairly arduous process to go through the process of just writing the grant out. This is very, very simplified. So really what we're asking for on the eligibility requirements are that you're an operating farm. So there's no startups that will be allowed to be awarded in this grant. You have to have had a general excise tax license dated prior to July 1, 2021, and or, if Form G45 or Form G49 are both applicable to prove the existence of your tax license, because you would have had filed for a previous period with that. We do, or there will be a requirement for residency. So this is a grant that is targeted for Maui County. So Maui, Lanai, Molokai, and what they're asking for is a year's worth of residency prior to application. And the way that we've asked to, I guess, prove that would be your income tax form, state income tax form, and 11. So we only need the first page of that. And the uniqueness about this is it's not only there's an applicant for the grant, but if your farm happens to be an LLC or a partnership or a corporation, any owner has to also be a resident of Maui County during that period. Nonprofits are also eligible to apply for this grant. So photo ID, and I guess the biggest component you'll see in our application process when we post at the end of this, you'll see a link to our website where the application resides, is you're going to be asked to give a farm needs statement. And that farm needs statement is really the determining factor that allows us to evaluate what your farm does, how it operates, what it produces, what it grows, where that product is sold or donated, and the scale of operations, the size of the farm, and the operation are really integral parts in allowing us to determine the need for what you're asking for. So some farms that would, say, apply for a $25,000 grant for a piece of equipment or a larger portion of infrastructure may not be awarded that amount. They may receive an award, but it might be lowered to a different level based on how the farm operates and how large it is. So that's something that I want everyone to take into account as they go through this. Otherwise, the application is very straightforward. So next slide, please. So the application period started October 14th, and it runs, and this is an application open period. So we're accepting all grant applications from October 14th to December 14th. And this is a complete 180 from last year's grant for those of you who might have applied for that or even received it. Is last year was a first come, first serve. This year, all grant applications will be accepted, and there will be no renewals or no, not renewals, but there will be no evaluations or awards until after the ending period for the open application period. So the preference, there was a tiered preference portion to last year's ag grant. There's also, it's going to carry over to this year's. So the preference is given to women-owned farms, Native Hawaiian-owned farms, and farms under 12 acres. And this one, I'll give you a little caveat to that, is that there could be, the farm may have a larger acreage, but we're looking at the aggregate of what is actually in use currently. So if you have, you know, a 20-acre farm, but you're really only farming on 7 acres, you would be eligible for this. If you have a 20-acre farm and you're farming on 15 and you want to get it to 20 again, that would not be an eligible request under this grant. And the other component is we are striving, and did last year as well as this year, we're looking to really get as many outer island farms involved in this as well. So we try and be as equitable as possible with the award process. And this year, unfortunately, we have less money to give out. So we really need to be discerning in making sure that the truly needy farms are eligible. So the applications are available on our website, and you'll see that in the next slide. They are submitted online. All of the supporting documents can be uploaded, and you can also print that application out and submit it in person if you would like to. That's fine as well. We really try and open it up to the comfort level for whoever is applying for this. And there's a fair amount of farmers who are currently working and they're not in front of a computer. So we try and get them involved as well. The only other thing I will put on here, or it says that the awards actually are, even though the farm is the awardee, the payment of this grant is made to the vendor of which you will be getting the supplies or services from. So if you're awarded, say 25,000, and you need 10,000 for this and 10,000 for that and 5,000 for this, we will individually pay each one of those vendors. The farm itself or the applicant does not get the disbursement. So other than that, it's very similar to what our process was last year. Next slide. I think that's it then. Gary, take it away.
Well, thank you, David. Those are very, very explicit and very detailed. Even I could follow it. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
With that, we'll start into a Q&A. We currently have 3 questions. It looks like mostly for Wayne, but I'll read them off and we'll go from there. The first one is from Anonymous. I'm looking into buying a distressed business with an EIDL. Can EIDL loans be assumed by new owners? Wayne? We still have Wayne.
You're muted, Wayne.
The SBA is muted. Annette, are you able to unmute him?
I cannot. I've asked him to unmute.
Okay. I might have
What I'll
stepped-
do while we're waiting
Yes.
is we had some questions that came in before the call. Oh, there he is, Wayne. Yep. Can you?
Yep, I'm here now, sorry.
Okay, great.
Hello, Wayne. Did you hear the first question?
I did not.
Okay. So the question is, I'm looking into buying a distressed business with an EIDL. Can EIDL loans be assumed by a new owner?
So if you look at the regulations, the answer is no. However, we have had cases, so it's done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. Second question from Patty. If I did not qualify the first time because I was not in an economic development zone, do I try again? Did the map change?
So the map has not changed, and the map is just for the advances, right? The targeted advances. That's what the target means, is you have to be in that map. And to tell you the truth, the map was created for the IRS for a different purpose in 2015. So not only has it not changed, it's pretty out of date. So a lot of times logically, if you physically are on the ground, it doesn't seem to make sense where the boundaries are, but unfortunately that's the way they wrote the rules and they wrote the grant. So if you're looking at the targeted advances, you do have to fall into the map, and the map has not changed.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. The next one is fairly long. I'm going to try and shorten it. But basically the question is, I'm going to start with the question and then I'll give you the background. Should I apply for a second draw from my existing EIDL loan or start a brand new application? So I was approved for an EIDL loan in 2020. At the time, my business was owned by myself and business partner, an LLC. Starting in 21, my business turned into a sole proprietorship. Everything stayed the same, the EIN, TET, and et cetera. And the only thing is the ownership has changed. So should I apply for a second draw?
So you can apply for a second draw, and when we say second draw, the way that the EIDL looks at entities is purely based on the EIN. So if the EIN has changed, then you would be putting in actually a new application. If the EIN has not changed, then yes, you would be putting it in for a second. But here's the weird determination. There is no second draw. What you would be doing is you would go back into the first EIDL application. Even if you turned it down, nonetheless, you would have had an approval. And so you would go into that and then you would ask for an increase. So your increase would be from 0 to whatever you want the new amount to be. And so that's the way you would work it. If you're applying under the same EIN, then you would go in and you would be asking for an increase, because there is no concept of getting a second draw or a second EIDL loan. In fact, people that go in and apply for a second loan, it's flagged as fraudulent because it's not allowed, right? So just get that concept in your mind. If you've got one, or even if you didn't take it, if you had applied before, you would go in and you would be applying for an increase. And it's all based on your EIN. So they don't care if your organizational structure has changed or if there's different owners or any of that kind of thing. I mean, they will probably ask about that, but in terms of just getting in and getting into the process, it's all based on your EIN.
Thanks, Wayne. Next question is for David from Robin. Do you need to have a farm? Can a business be a value-add food production business supporting local farmers?
That actually is a great question. Technically speaking, you have to be producing and have to be a working farm. But if there's a relationship and you're a business directly related to that and you're doing value added or some form of that, I don't think it would fly, but I would tell you just be on the safe side and apply anyway.
Thanks.
Yep.
Next one also from Robin is how and when is manpower paid if the monies are distributed to the employee?
Okay, another great question. The way that we do it is we would ask you to go through an employment service here on Maui that does contracting. So employers options or pro service or someone like that. And they would provide all the paperwork and we would pay them directly as a vendor. And hence you would get that manpower. You're still choosing the workers, but it goes through that employment agency.
Thanks. Next question for Wayne. If I have a 2017 business tax license and a 2021 LLC under a different name and tax ID, both are still open and operating in my name, is it possible to apply for funding as a 2017 business?
And who is that for?
Anonymous. That's for Wayne, sorry. From Anonymous for Wayne.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that again, for the EIDLs, once they establish that you are a legitimate business, they pretty much go off of your EIN and just look at tax returns. So if you have, it's not going to be because this is federal based, it's not state based. They're not really looking at the dates for your GE licenses. They're really looking at your EINs.
Okay, thank you. Another question for Wayne, is there a minimum amount for the EIDL?
There is not a minimum amount. And so what happens is that when you do your application, they look at your past performance and there's an equation that they utilize to calculate the maximum amount you can get, and then you get to choose how much of that you want to take. So theoretically, I mean, they sort of discourage really small amounts because remember, this is going to be a 30-year loan. So, if you have such a small amount that it's going to look ridiculous to amortize that over, 30 years, they're probably not going to be looking at that. And that's also why they have the advance, right? So the advance, which is up to $10,000, is where a lot of people end up just taking the advance and not actually taking the amount. So there's no stated regulation that says what the minimum amount is that you can take, but I know that they would sort of balk if it looked ridiculous to amortize that amount over 30 years. I've seen as low as I have a client that just asked for $2,500. So he was approved for $150,000 and he took $2,500 and that was okay with them.
Okay, great. The last one that I have here in the Q&A is from Kathy. Can you review the employee retention credit at a high level?
So basically the employment retention credit is taken when you file your quarterly tax statements for your employees. And essentially what that amounts to is that there is a certain percentage of what it looks like in the real world is that you're giving people time off, but it's not going to be paid time off. I mean, it's paid time off for those people, but that salary and that tax comes from the retention credit. It doesn't come from you. And so that's how, with the general idea is that you can retain employees because maybe they have issues with childcare or something, but they have to take time off, or you don't have work for them and you're having them take time off. And so the whole idea behind that is that the government is helping finance that time off.
Okay, very good. Well, that ends all of the questions in the Q&A. No, wait, I think we just got another one. Looks like for David, for ag grant, does a severe disability count as a priority or only women and Native Hawaiian applications? A big help for disabled farmers, not many options for disabled farmers.
Currently, as it sits, there's no preference given for a disability. So it would have to fall under the criteria that's existing at this point, unfortunately.
Thanks, David. All right, with that, I'll turn it back to Annette.
Thank you, Gary. We did have some questions that came in beforehand, and I'm just going to post them. And perhaps, Wayne, you'd like to speak to them. They're sort of frequently asked questions as well. And some of it you covered, perhaps you just want to reiterate them, Wayne. The first question is, does the EIDL still have the forgiveness program of $10,000? And question 2, the backup to that is, if I don't use a loan, is it returnable in the first 2 years without the interest, or once the loan is returned with the percentage?
Right. So forgiveness, that term is only utilized with PPP, right? So the EIDL loan portion does not have a forgiveness aspect to it. But the fact that you talked about $10,000, I think is just sort of a syntax confusion between the loan and the advance, because the advance can be up to $10,000. But the advance comes to you right as a grant from day one. So there's no application for forgiveness or anything like that, right? So that's sort of the answer to the first one. And then on the second one, when you get an EIDL loan, your payments, the repayment is actually deferred for 2 years, right? You don't have to start making your payments back for 2 years. Unfortunately, interest will accrue from the day that you get the funds dispersed. There's no prepayment penalty. So another way you can look at what you're asking is you can, quote unquote, return the money at any point. There's no prepayment penalty. However, you will have to be paying back more than what you got because there was all the interest that accrued.
Thank you. So this was answered pretty much about the PPP loan. It's pretty much ended, but perhaps just quickly reiterate the forgiveness aspect of that.
Sure. So PPP, so EIDL loans are at 3.75%. So PPP was attractive to some people because it was a 1-year loan, or now it's a 5-year loan, but it was at 1%. That's no longer available to apply for. What is still available is that if you did get a PPP loan, you have to explicitly ask for forgiveness. It's not an automatic. And when you apply for forgiveness, that eligibility to apply for forgiveness ends 10 months from the end of the covered period. So you can't go and get any more PPP loans. Those are done. However, if you got one, you still have 10 months from when your covered period end to apply to get forgiveness.
Great. And we'll post these on our website as well, just to have that information in that record. And you talked about how to increase an already existing EIDL loan. Just repeat that and the details there.
Sure. It's just logging back into your EIDL portal. And then you'll see that there will be a green button to indicate that you desire to increase your EIDL amount. So keep that in mind, that you are asking for an increase. You are not asking for a second draw or something like that. Strangely, there is an option to ask for a second loan, which I'm not sure why they do it, because as soon as you do that, it's considered a fraudulent claim. So, but simply, if you've already gotten one before, you go back into your portal and you'll actually see a big green button that indicates that you desire to increase your EIDL amount.
Great. And we've had several links in the slide deck, and all these will be shared via the slide deck. I just saw a question come in, and the links that have gone into the chat are the ones that we have in the slide deck as well. So I'll make sure that you get all of these. And we had another one, which was how can these services, how can they be implemented to serve our Hawaiian homelands beneficiaries? Do you have any specific response to that, Wayne and or David?
Well, so from the SBA, there are no sort of advantages given to any of the social economic disadvantaged groups. These are really targeted at small businesses. So from that perspective, if you are talking about a small business located in the Hawaiian Homes area, then they are eligible like every other small business. But otherwise, just being a recipient or an occupant of Hawaiian Homes doesn't really have any advantage for any of the SBA products.
As far as micro ag loans, they are eligible if the farm is located within the homelands, either on Molokai or here on Maui. If it's a working farm, operating farm, it's eligible to apply for these grants. There's no preference given. Obviously, you're Native Hawaiian, so you're in that preferred status.
Great. So quite a few questions there. Another one came in from Olga saying, and this is really open to everyone, including Gary, that any other grants or low interest funding opportunities outside of SBA and not agricultural?
Well, we are aware of several opportunities coming down the pipeline, but we have no details at this point in time. We will be posting them and having seminars as soon as they are announced. So watch this station for those announcements. We actually have no details to tell you at this point in time.
Great, thank you. Yes, MEDB, we're constantly looking at the resources we can make available to the small businesses Maui community. I'm seeing a few questions come into the chat, and let's have a quick look at those. Who do you contact SBA for reconsideration of a previous EIDL loan application? And does MEDB have a direct contact with an SBA department chief? So our contact is with Wayne as a representative of SBA, and the reconsideration of a previous EIDL loan application. Wayne, I would say that it's really an application. I think you mentioned about it before, that if that's like 0 was received, that you apply again on top of that.
Right. Or the other thing you can do is there is a customer support number that you can call and ask that a loan representative call you back and talk about, reconsideration of the application that had been turned down, like what can be done and so on. The other thing is that there is an email address, and it's pdrecons, that's RECONS @sba.gov, and that's also a customer support line specifically for people that understand that the request coming in is about reconsidering an application that either has not been done yet or got turned down, and you want to discuss that.
Thanks, Wayne. And I'll make sure to add that to the slide deck, those details, or in the email, so people have got that information as well if they didn't quite hear that. And just before we end the questions, I've got a link there for our feedback. It's really important for us. I'm going to finish off with some more questions, but I really want to make sure that you get this link. We're going to post that in the chat as well, and we'll send that in an email to give us your feedback on the webinar, on the series, what you got out of it. Plus, there's an opportunity there to pop in your name if you want us to contact you for some one-on-one business assistance, or if whether that's with Medb, if you want to speak to Wayne or David, give us that feedback, and then we can reach out to you for that. We did have another question come in, which is unrelated to what we spoke on, but we talked about other funding opportunities. Is what is being done related to grants for alternative energy projects in Hawaii?
So the only one that I'm aware of is coming from the USDA, their rural division, not the farm division, but the rural division of the USDA. And it's a program called Rural Energy, I can't even remember all, but the acronym is REAP, R-E-A-P. And it's basically alternative energy, both in terms of utilizing off the grid methodologies and or just switching over your business to all high efficiency appliances. But if you go to the USDA and just Google REAP, R-E-A-P, it's a rural energy program. And it's not necessarily for Hawaii, it's actually for any rural, which all of Maui is considered rural area, and it's not, it won't pay for the whole project, but it basically will reimburse you for up to 20% of the project.
Great, thanks, Wayne. Another question has come in for EIDL. If your business is not located on the IRS map, should you just stop there?
Yes, for the targeted advances, you would just stop. For the EIDL loan product, there's no requirement for locale.
Great, thanks. Okay, with that, Annette, anything? There we go.
Those were Wayne's final thoughts that you were alluding to earlier on a slide. Did you want to, if we've got a little bit of time, Wayne, a couple of minutes for you to, finalize and any thoughts that came out of the questions, etc., and then to you also, David.
Yeah, so the main thing is these opportunities from the SBA are about to expire, and they will go away on December 31st. So you do need to apply for these as soon as possible. The second thing is outside of relief funding, the normal SBA working capital loans and the 504 long-term asset loans are still available as usual. And then the other thing that I think someone was asking about is like for Hawaiian homelands. So the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, right? The CNHA. So they actually have gotten into the loan business, the microloan business, and they give preference to anyone with Hawaiian blood. And then the other option is OHA has their OHA revolving fund and the Malama loan. And again, the idea there is that because they're dealing with just Native Hawaiians, you are competing with much fewer people, and you see them wanting to help Native Hawaiians. Therefore, they're more open, especially for startups, because most commercial banks and commercial lenders, they really won't touch a startup.
Thank you, Wayne. David.
Yeah, I think the only final thoughts that I have are to just make sure that people go ahead and even if they're on the fence as far as eligibility, to go ahead and apply during the open period, because once it closes, then that's it. it's not going to make any difference. So we really are going to evaluate all the applicants once the application period closes, and we're gonna judge them equally based on need. So that would be my takeaway on that one.
Well, excellent. Thank you, David. And Wayne, thank you very much for your presentations and all those details. Again, thank you, Annette, for your facilitation. And as the MC for this, I'll sign off. Thank you all for attending and listening. Hopefully we can work with you and get your businesses going, get you some funding, and let's expand all of our businesses here on Maui. Thank you all very much.